Hey everyone, it's Egwin from Scope of Life and Beyond Systems. Welcome to my new video series on how to master your emotions. Now we all have them, we all experience them, sometimes positive ones, sometimes negative ones. But when it comes down to actually dealing with them in a healthy and sustainable way, I see that many people out there have troubles doing so, probably because they simply have never been taught how to actually do that or what emotions even are. This is why I created this video series to, first of all, start and explaining what emotions are, and from that actually giving you guys some tools that each and every one can use on a regular day basis to actually deal with emotions in a healthy and sustainable way. Since the topic is so huge, I'm going to divide this video series in a couple of different videos, starting with answering the question, what are emotions and what triggers emotions, in this very first video. In the next ones, I'll give more detailed tools of how one can actually deal with them. But this is the foundation, and to understand something, to understand the inner workings of something, quite often, and also in this case, already gives a lot of the solution. So right now, I definitely suggest you watch through the whole video and stay tuned for the coming videos as well, because it's really important to get the whole picture here, because there are so many different angles and so many different aspects to really be aware of. Starting right now with this video, we are talking about 4 different aspects. First of all, what's the foundation of what we call emotions? Secondly, what are emotions in the body? Thirdly, the correlation between emotions and the mind. And fourth, what actually causes or triggers emotions. Now, when we start at the beginning and take a look at the word emotion itself, it actually derives from emovere, which is a Latin term. The E comes from, it's actually a variant from ex, which in Latin means out, and movere actually means move. So the literal translation of the word origin of emotion means to move out, or out movement, outside movement, moving out. So something that has to do with emotions is actually tied into movement somehow, which gives us one very important clue, which is that emotions are something extremely dynamic. And whenever we try to freeze emotions, then problems will start to emerge. Actually, this is one of the root causes of a couple of emotions. Whenever we try to hold on to them, then they actually potentiate and get worse and intensify, and sometimes even flip to what we call the negative side. But now let's take one step further back and literally talk about what is the foundation that we call emotions. Now, first of all, emotions and the mind are 2 completely different things. And while they do definitely influence each other or interact with each other, emotions do not originally come from the mind. They are not even created in our brains for that matter. But let me take it one step further back. What we call emotions isn't even just a human trait. In fact, what we call emotions are fundamental principles of interaction that can be found on all scales in all natural systems. Now let me elaborate on that. Some basic principles like attraction or repulsion, high energy, low energy, chaos or order, and things like that. Those are fundamental and basic principles, and literally all systems that we can observe out there, they rely on those very, very fundamental principles. No matter if it's just a physical system or something that we even call a biological system. Our body interacts with all those different vibrations and with all those different physical influences from the outside, and they create a specific pattern which at a certain point we learned to define as a specific emotion. Some of those reaction patterns, they are hardwired, and some of those reaction patterns we learn over time. But still, when it comes to the foundation of emotions, the most fundamental things, they are actually all around us at all times, and they are extremely physical. So now let's take it to the next step. What are emotions in our body? The first thing of your body to react to those outside influences, outside pulsations, and basic principles that you can find in nature are actually your cells. It's the cellular pulsation and the intercellular communication, both in electrical terms as well as in chemical terms, plus our proteins that react to those outside emotional influences. At that point, they are not yet called emotions, but those are basic pulsational and communicative patterns that the very foundation our body is built on actually reacts to, which is the cellular pulsation and the cellular communication. The first part of the nervous system to jump onto that is the enteric nervous system, which is the very complex neurological fabric that's in our gut area. Hence the term your gut feeling. And from the enteric nervous system, then the information spreads further to the rest of the autonomic nervous system, which controls smooth musculature throughout our organ systems, throughout our cardiovascular system, and so on. And then, only then, in literally the third or fourth step, depending on how you want to count, then we are at the point where it actually reaches the somatosensory nervous system, which means that's the first point where you actually have a chance to censor whatever is happening. Before that, self-censorship is not possible. Before that, it's something that's running completely automated. Now, the funny thing here is that since the smooth musculature of your body reacts to emotional impulses before you're even consciously aware of them, this means that no matter which emotional reaction we are talking about, your body already reacts with movement. If we're talking about a very acute and very strong emotional impulse, then this might literally jump the fence and even trigger the skeletal muscles through our reflex bows. But that's only the case in very specific situations with extreme impulses, with very, very strong triggers. Now, the question is, yeah, okay, but my emotions don't always come from outside influences. First of all, in probably 90% of the cases that where you do not really know where they come from, they come either from outside influences or from your experience that jumps on an outside trigger. So the outside is definitely a very important part in all of this. Still, what's the role of the mind in all of this? Where is the correlation between emotion and mind? Because some obviously are going to say, well, if I think about something, like if I imagine that first kiss with my girlfriend that I had like 2 years ago, if I remember that, then I sort of tune into that feeling. I literally create emotion. And that's partially true, because what happens is that strong memories are tied into physical reactions that our brain at a certain point learned to term. Meaning our brain, our conscious mind, just simply learned to interpret a physical pattern, a physical pulsation, a physical communication, body-internal communicational pattern, and actually learned to put a label on it. Whether that label is love, fear, depression, anxiety, stress, joy, happiness, that's a different story. But the very foundation is that all those terms, they are something where we learned to interpret a specific physically occurring pattern. Now, since emotions are quite tightly linked with making memory, emotions are even tightly linked with our perception of time, of how time actually passes. This also means that obviously there is a correlation between our thoughts and emotions. Actually, our thoughts are extremely patterned. They're extremely hard structured aspects, whereas emotions always have this flow and this living aspect to them. This is also where the word emotion comes from. It's our physical body actually acting out, actually moving, expressing something through movement. Whether or not this tiny internal movement becomes a larger body movement, like we laugh or we dance or something like that, that's a different thing. But it's the foundation of what's happening. Now, what happens if you imagine something happening in the future that you might be a little bit afraid of? So you create anxiety. This literally means that your brain creates a pattern of something that might happen based on your experiences that you had so far. And it's almost as if the brain actually extrapolates the whole foundation of experiences that you currently have. And then again, if it's something like anxiety, the brain links the physical pattern of fear to the thought in an attempt to prevent you from going there. So basically, it's the brain that uses at that point a specific physical pattern. But as soon as that physical pattern is triggered, it's again an emotional pattern, a vibrational pattern has been linked to a thought. The thought itself is not an emotion. The thought can only be tied into an emotion or trigger one. This is also the part where it gets really interesting as soon as we talk about like how can we actually deal with that, or how does that help me, and what then are emotional traumas. Emotional traumas sometimes sort of deformate the foundation of our body. In a completely healthy and neutral state, our body is capable of interacting with our outside world and with our thoughts in a completely free way, which means every emotion, every specific pulsational and intercommunicational pattern in the body can be displayed, can be experienced, but it can also be let go. And that's the point. A trauma always means that the ability to get rid of that specific pulsational pattern is somewhat limited. Why those things are limited sometimes depend on the mind, but most of the time also depend on the body and our energy system. And when I talk about energy system, I mean both. I mean a very physical-based energy system of our internal chemistry, of our hormonal levels, also of our own electromagnetic radiation that's produced by our brains, that's produced by our hearts. Because that's actually a major informational channel through which emotional impulses run. Because as humans, we're tied into this basic concept of wanting to synchronize to other humans in an attempt to understand them better. A lot of that, as we know right now, also scientifically proven, actually runs through our heart center and through the electromagnetic field that's radiating off from our hearts, and they are actually interactive with each other. So my heart electromagnetic field with the electromagnetic field from the heart of someone else, or even with the electromagnetic field of Earth for that matter. So information, pulsation and basic patterns are exchanged on many different levels. Now the thing is this, if you are in a room, there is a foundational pulsation present in that room. That comes from the color on the walls, that comes from the music that is played in there, that comes from the material that room is built, that comes even from the shape of the room itself. So this very foundational structure creates an underlying emotional trigger that your body reacts to. Now the question is, why then do some people feel comfortable in that room and maybe some other people not at all? And this is where patterns come into play. Because depending on your experience and depending on the emotional patterns that you hardwired over time due to repetitiveness in your physical body, they sort of distort the neutral foundation, the neutral ability of your body to completely freely interact with whatever is present in a current moment. And so that's why suddenly there are 10 people in a room and each and every one of those 10 people feels differently. Also because suddenly it's not just the room, it's maybe also the interaction with the other people. And that's where it really gets interesting, where it also gets complex. But still, let me break it back down again, just really quickly. Emotions at their foundation are fundamental pulsational and intercommunicative elements that can be found all around us. It's literally, it's vibrations, it's sounds, it's the interaction on an atomic level, it's how an amoeba reacts to its surroundings, to the acidity level in the ocean, and so on. So we're talking that basic. So that's the foundation of emotions. And then when we come into the body eventually at the beginning of its life learns to interpret all those different pulsations and put names, put labels to them. Eventually, the human also develops the ability to connect those emotions with thoughts and vice versa, thus partially gains the ability to create an emotion-like pulsation in the body just by thinking. Depending on how strong that is, it will also emanate to the outside and will also create a new resonance foundation for interaction. This is where body-based psychotherapy and stuff like that come in when it really comes into dealing with strong physical or emotional traumata that actually distort the physical body as well. This is where different emotions, they're still basic pulsational patterns, are actually combined to more complex versions. And they sometimes have to do with our social background and what we have learned. But it all comes down to this very foundational principle that emotions are at the very core of the ability of a biological system to adapt and interact with its surroundings. This being said, this even partially delivers solutions on how to actually deal with emotions. As long as you try to control emotions just with your mind, your body will always be left behind and eventually retain those problems. Whenever you try to just work on emotions energetically, eventually your mind and maybe your body are left behind. Whenever you work on emotions just physically, again, sometimes the mental aspect gets left behind. So it's really all of those three aspects, they have to be tied together in order to clear emotional blockages or to actually deal with acute situations the best in such a way that it really becomes this completely natural touch and go aspect of, okay, now I feel this moment is gone, now I feel that, now I participate in this pulsation, now I participate in that pulsation. I'll definitely talk more about actual methods in the next video. I don't want this to become even longer than it already is. And one thing that I'm going to talk about in a separate video more in detail, but I just want to give you the basic ideas of it, is the question of what is it that actually triggers emotion then? And the answer is there are two main aspects. There are outside influences and internal aspects. The outside influences can reach from sound to color to shapes in your surroundings to different vibrations that are created by machinery or that are created by, say, an earthquake or things like that. All of those things, electromagnetical interferences, all of those things influence the body and sort of create that underlying foundation of an emotional state. The other aspect of outside influences are human interactions where you meet with another person and that triggers a specific emotion, whether it's through what you're talking or just this basic attraction or repulsion aspect that's going on and that everyone has experiences with. Or another aspect can be just simple situations that you observe. Now, for instance, if you observe an accident and that creates emotions, then this is simple, an outside influence that triggers maybe a memory or that triggers a specific pulsation physically in your body that makes you feel something. Either way, whether it's triggering a memory or the memory of pain or something like that, it eventually still becomes a physical aspect. It becomes a physical feeling. And more often than not, it's easier to actually dissolve the physical aspect than the mental aspect behind it in the first attempt to actually clear yourself of that emotion again. The other large group are internal aspects. And when we talk about internal aspects, then we're talking about things like thoughts, memories, intentions, and biochemical aspects like hormones, even our sleep cycle and circadian rhythm, and our diet. Now, the diet is obviously a mixed thing because partially it's an external influence, partially it's an internal aspect. But the thing is this, our body needs to function somehow. Depending on its biochemistry and bioelectrical aspects, a body has the ability to deal with certain situations in a specific way. Now, if you're biochemically completely imbalanced because your diet is completely off, this will also have effects on your body's ability to adapt or display certain emotions, to adapt to or display certain emotions. This will also shift how you feel. Now, one of those new terminologies out there is this microbiome research of how bacteria in your gut actually influence your emotions. Of course they do, because they're living pulsational organisms in there, and they have the most direct link to the enteric nervous system possible. So of course that influences the way you can deal with emotions as well. When it comes to hormones, because some might say, yeah, what about those mood swings and stuff like that? Hormones in themselves do not create emotions. They just shift your ability to deal with emotional situations. So they change the body's ability to adapt to different types of emotions in a different way. So that's how, for instance, menstrual cycles or stuff like that are tied into all of this. It's not really that those hormones suddenly create something that wasn't there in the first place. They might highlight specific aspects because the body, due to its biochemical foundational change, is sort of more alert in a specific area or more dulled down in another. That's why hormones have an emotional effect, but they do not create emotion themselves. So those are really interesting and important aspects. And obviously the sleep cycle also is sort of an indirect thing, because the sleep cycle of course also influences our hormone levels, influences our biochemistry, thus also influences our ability to interact and to deal with emotions. All right, so that's been really a lot right now. I hope you understand a little bit better what emotions are right now. I'm just going to give you a short overview of everything that I just said now in the next 1 or 2 minutes of this video. And other than that, stay tuned for the next part, where I'll definitely go a little bit more into detail of what all this information now actually means and how we can use it to actually change something to the better in our emotional states. And so much I can tell you right now, it's really important to understand that emotions themselves, the first line of interaction with emotions is always our body. The body is at the center of it all. So whenever you can change the pulsation and the intercellular communication and pulsation of your body, then you have a good chance of actually dealing with your emotions in a much, much better way as well. Thanks for watching. Make sure to stay tuned. Hit the subscribe button below the video to get notified whenever the next one is up. Have a wonderful day, and if you have any questions, which I can easily imagine, make sure to comment down below or ask me via email if it's more personal. Have a wonderful time. See you around soon. Subscribe, like and share. Thanks for watching, and bye.